Hello, I'm Dr. Carl, and I've been meaning to make this video for a while now, but I haven't really had the chance. Any rate, I am of course ecstatic that a few months back the district court in Texas ruled against sexist service registration. For those of you not from the United States of America, I should give you a little bit of background. The United States of America, thankfully, unlike most of Europe and Latin America, never really had the tradition of a running peacetime draft where every man is required to serve in the military upon coming of age. This is what I call the glorified national sexist enslavement of young men. However, what the United States of America has had is a registration requirement. What this is ever since 1980, every young man upon coming of age is required to register with the military. This was started in 1980 in response to the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. This policy, nearly 40 years old now, is what someone at the Cato Institute once called the government program with 9 lives. Let me explain. While campaigning for president, Ronald Reagan in 1980 said this makes no sense, and he promised to end it should he become president. Well, on January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan became president. But what happened? Well, that's when the Solidarity Uprising started in Poland. And we now know that Reagan was threatening Brezhnev behind the scenes that if the Soviet Union moves on Poland, the United States of America was not backing down 3 times. First Hungary in 56, then Czechoslovakia in 68. You move on Poland in 81, and this time it's war. Well, if you're threatening war with your enemy, especially if your enemy is the Soviet Union, it's not exactly time to be ending military registration. Well, flash forward a decade, Cold War has come to an end. Soviet Union not only pulled out of Afghanistan, doesn't even exist anymore. And the time in the 90s to end this had come. But the United States of America had the misfortune of having that immoral scumbag Clinton as president, and he came out in favor of continuing it. Well, thankfully he was out of office on January 20th, 2001. But that's the year September 11th happened, so of course there was no talk of ending registration at that point. So here we are in 2019, and finally there's been a court ruling. At no point have I been prouder to be a member of the National Coalition for Men than on the day, a while back, we filed a lawsuit against this system. Basically, the court ruled that at this point, we can no longer justify having a registration requirement for only men. The court made it clear that they're not saying which way it has to go, end it altogether, or expand it to include women. I speak for most when I say it's best to just end it altogether. It's unnecessary, and it serves no purpose. Countries should not have a draft unless it's absolutely necessary. It's best for governments to leave their people alone. Thankfully, the number of European countries, amongst other countries in Latin America and Asia, that have a draft has gone down considerably. Considering that in the early 90s it was nearly all, it's down to not just a small handful, but well below half. And many of those that do have it, fewer than 20% ever actually serve, and the length of service has gone way down. However, I would like to mention the case of Switzerland, a country I had the pleasure of living in once. Switzerland had a referendum on whether or not to abolish this, and 72% voted to keep it. That includes a majority of women. But what's particularly noteworthy is while a majority of older men voted to end it, a majority of younger men voted to end it, a majority of older men voted to keep it. And amongst women, both younger and older voted to keep it. Now take a moment to let that sink in. The only group that's actually affected by it, younger men, is the only one that voted to abolish it. Younger women voted to keep it. That is blatantly wrong. Worse yet, there was even a group formed, Women for Conscription. I have to ask these women, why do they love this so much that they would form such a group? However, the Swiss government has been looking into expanding this to include women. I'm not holding my breath that it's going to happen soon, but, well, they said they were in favor of it, so it should be. I remember when I was living there, hearing that the universities often start a month later for the freshmen because, unlike other European countries that had maybe 7 months, 10 months a year requirement, Switzerland, it was 4 months initially and then 2 weeks every year till age 45. So as a result, the freshman classes started usually in October. I remember how angry I got thinking about that. So the girls get an extra month summer vacation at the boys' expense? Well, maybe that's why they voted to keep it. But at any rate, I wanted to mention a bit about an argument that I've heard some justify regarding pregnancy. Since women are the ones who are pregnant and give birth, that's why it's okay to have a sexist draft policy. Indeed, the argument is that men have the army, women have pregnancy. But I've seen some false equivalencies in my day, but this has got to be about the ultimate one. You cannot compare a choice to a legal requirement. Women can choose to have children or not. Women can choose to serve in the military or not. Women can do both. Women can do neither. Men, by contrast, have one legal requirement and a physical impossibility. I hasten to point out that in Romania, under Ceausescu, there was a requirement that every woman bear 3 children in her lifetime. That is the equivalency. Obviously, I think that's absolutely wrong, but I'm pointing out, if you think that women have pregnancy and men have the army, only in that situation can you make that case. Here's why it's wrong for other reasons as a false equivalency. First of all, when it comes to, say, applying for citizenship, if you wish to get citizenship in another country, if you're a young man, you have to worry about a military service requirement. By contrast, if you're a young woman, they're not going to ask you how many children you plan to have. You can say, I plan to have no children, and they will probably say, why are you telling us? There's no bearing on you getting citizenship. Worse yet, there are countries such as Cyprus and Singapore which have an exit visa requirement for younger men. Case in point, in Cyprus, a young man upon turning 16 cannot even leave the country without getting an exit visa first to make sure he's not avoiding the army. So imagine a family in Cyprus with, say, a twin son and daughter, both 17, both have a few weeks off coming up and want to go to the U.S. for a vacation. The son has to get an exit visa. Now, while he'll probably get it, especially if he's going with his family, realize it could be rejected. And that's that. He can't leave the country. And on top of all this, we're always hearing women talk about how privileged men are. It's hard to say men are privileged based on this alone. And I also like to give one other example about this. A few years back, Lithuania reintroduced conscription. Now, thankfully, no one has actually been drafted. But still, the procedure was put back in place, and the president is a woman. She said, we must all do our part to defend Lithuania. All? And before you say, well, women in Lithuania have to be pregnant and give birth, realize she never had children herself. But again, thankfully, this is changing as many countries have abolished it, and some, like Norway, expanded it to include women, and Sweden abolished it but then brought it back to include both men and women. Now, thankfully, in the case of both Norway and Sweden, hardly anyone is being drafted. And again, I hasten to add, it's far better to have no draft. But still, if there's going to be one, this sexist element can no longer exist if a society is going to say it has equality. And if this exists, it's awfully hard for anyone to say that men are privileged. I'm Dr. Carl. Enjoy.